Hello, my dear audience, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Micro. I am so happy that you are here with me. If this is the first time that you are tuning in to Let's Talk Micro, well, welcome and thank you for choosing this as your podcast. Okay, so let me briefly touch on today's episode, and episode is about the need for collaboration between the lab and the in vitro diagnostics industry, while at the same time bringing more information about what the industry is and what type of work they do. So in the episode, I am joined by two guests, Andrea Prinzi and Kristen Smith. They've been guests before and they do a great job discussing this topic. So let's go ahead and go into the episode. Okay, so sometimes in the lab, partnerships and collaborations, maybe and I'll be honest, I started learning more about this as started getting more involved with the podcast and then going outside a little bit outside of the lab. But this is something that I think will be good for you, the audience, to learn. And there was an article about partnerships and collaborations, and the two guests that I have today here, they've been here before. One of them is Kristen Smith, and she was in the episode of the ABMM examination. And the second one, you know her, she's been in the podcast many times. She's been a guest, and she's also the co-host of the AMR series. So, Andrea Prinzi. So, everyone, welcome to Let's Talk Micro.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for being here. What a pleasure again to have you both and talk here in the podcast. So, let's start with. It's been a while, so let's start with a quick introduction about what do you do and anything else that you want to add.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kristen Smith. I am a PhD microbiologist and a diplomat of the American Board of Medical Microbiology. In my past life, I was a lab director at a reference lab, but currently I work for bioMérieux, and I am a medical advisor and so fortunate to work with so many clinical professionals. And we really help engage our medical colleagues at our institutions. We engage with them to enhance medical knowledge. We do that internally, externally. We help with research efforts. We help review marketing material to make sure it's scientifically accurate. So, really, just getting to talk science every day and living the dream.
Love it. Hi, everyone. I'm Andrea Prinzi. It's great to be talking to you again. I work with the wonderful Kristen Smith at bioMérieux. I'm a field medical director for U.S. Medical Affairs, which, in addition to all the things Kristen listed, I also spend a lot of time thinking about evidence generation and thinking about how we can demonstrate evidence for the impact of diagnostic products. So once they come to the market, how do we make sure that they're actually doing what we hope they would do, which includes not only performance but impacting patient lives and improving health. So doing a lot of that work. It's an awesome job. We have a wonderful company, and we love thinking about ways we continue to work with our clinical colleagues and our public health colleagues and our academic researchers and all those folks. So that's what really led to this article, and happy to be here.
Perfect. And one of the things that we'll talk about maybe towards the end a little bit, but as far as and something that I have learned a lot about, and when you talk about examples of roles in the industry and things like that, and you hear these terms, like I didn't know before, you hear like medical science liaison and things like that, and medical director, and so it's we'll talk more about that. So you kind of mention it and talk about it about the goal of the article. Is there anything else that you can expand of it about? You wanted to bring like an awareness or explaining of how the process works, or maybe you can talk about what's the inspiration to write this article.
Felipe Cicada. Um, Actually, I should pronounce it Felipe. Is how you really pronounce it. Sorry, Felipe, I said that wrong. Um, he really inspired this article. He came to us first with this idea, having recently finished his CPEP training and working as a microbiology director now. He's talked a lot with industry colleagues and has friends in the space and other people that he's worked with for various reasons. And he's like, I just don't feel like there's enough awareness around how these collaborations work or what the roles of industry are. Should you want to collaborate with someone from industry or find a job in industry? Like, it's just really a little mysterious. And I think for those of us that grew up in the academic and clinical settings, the access to this knowledge may have been a little limited just based on maybe how we think industry functions or any negative biases or perceptions towards the roles may have limited that. So he really felt like it would be helpful to break it down and explain how these things work and where there may be opportunities for collaboration. And so he was the brain behind this. And then we all came together and we're like, yes, we would love to explain this. We do a lot of this, I think, day to day, trying to help educate about what these roles are and how we can collaborate. Kristen, I'm sure you have something to add.
I think that was beautiful and perfect. And I would just like to add that I think, especially in today's environment, I'm talking about our industry right now, but not limited to our industry, but silos and a lack of diversity are really barriers to innovation. And so one of the outcomes that I think that I would like for this article is to just really help break down barriers and silos and help people work together and engage and know that there are opportunities to partner with industry. Because even as a laboratory director at a pretty well-known reference lab, I was unaware of a lot of opportunities that were out there. And if I didn't have that knowledge, I know that a lot of my colleagues at different types of institutions probably had no idea or awareness. So bringing awareness to these opportunities and just, thinking about it, if something resonates in this conversation with you today, reach out to, not just us at bioMeriU, but also other industries that you partner with and work with in your labs, because there's probably a lot more opportunities out there that you're aware of. So just have the courage to ask.
I love it how you say, breaking down, right? That's what I do. That's my goal of things, explaining them, bringing awareness. So I really love this. Is one of the reasons as I read this, as I mentioned, something that, you also mentioned that, Kristen, about even you as a director, not being aware of things. I imagine so. A lot of us, at the bench level, definitely don't know the most interaction that we have with the industries when an instrument breaks. That's pretty much it. You call someone, hey, we're gonna send someone, and maybe but other than that, you're not too aware of things.
I have a question for you. How many times have you been working with an instrument and said, I wish it did this, or this could be better, or you know what, this button is in a horrible place and this is stupid? Like, the industry would love to hear that, because there's always going to be different iterations of our tests and systems. And having that knowledge about the end user is so valuable to the company. So just things that you might think not are important to you or to say to anybody are really important for the industry partners to hear.
Well said. So I invite you, if you're listening to this, and anything that you see, or any feedback that you have to provide, voice your concern, or let your manager, your director, or even you can reach out to me and let me know, and I'll try to forward your thing, your concerns or your feedback. It's good to talk about these things, and as you said, you will love to hear about it. Okay, so what is obviously, so let's talk about the importance of clinical, public health, and industry partnerships throughout the in vitro diagnostics pipeline, and maybe at the same time you can talk a little bit about what this pipeline is.
You want to go?
Yeah, I'll go for it. I'd love to. So I think I'll start by saying, let's just start this episode off with setting the stage and saying, okay, there's a role for everyone. Everyone's role looks a bit different. What everyone needs from the process looks a bit different. And some of these collaborations aren't for everyone for various reasons, right? So maybe you're in a situation where engaging with industry presents a conflict of interest that limits some other sort of academic work you're doing. And that's just the way it is. And we need to have guardrails and boundaries. And so we all respect and understand that. So where you come into different levels of engagement with industry will differ based on your job or your academic promotion track, or if you're currently writing guidelines for something. These are all different stages of career where maybe you can or can't get involved. That said, there's a lot of opportunity that I think folks are unaware of that could be really career developing. That's something that we try to really highlight, especially I think those of us that are maybe more early or mid-career that work in industry. It's become really apparent to me since joining industry how career developing some of this work can be, particularly if you're aligning with an organization that aligns with your moral compass and your values and scientific work that you believe in, or makes products that you rely on or believe in. There's really an opportunity to do work that's meaningful there for you. So I just think it looks different for everyone and want to emphasize that. But I think I'll walk through kind of what this pipeline looks like, and then I'll pass it over to Kristen to talk more about maybe some opportunities for collaboration along all those phases, if that sounds good. Kristen,
Yeah.
thumbs up. All right, love it. So first of all, you've got we call it the product pipeline. This is so complex, and everything I'm going to say is just really keeping it very high level. So just know this is a very complex process with lots of people working on this internally and externally. But the very first phase is really this innovation and discovery phase. This looks different across manufacturers or industry companies, but this is where a lot of information is coming from non-clinical laboratory research, so more like basic sciences research or from more formal academia research settings where you're getting these early kind of prototypes of things or ideas for where maybe there's a big gap and a need, and you've got early investigations that are kind of coming up and being presented to industry, and there's maybe interest. And so there's lots of really interesting groups that work with academic and clinical partners to present things to industry where there might be interest. There's opportunity to engage industry early with a concept or an idea. So lots of opportunity there, especially in like the academic research center. So then if you kind of move to the next step, you've got development or proof of concept. And so this is where we would get additional insight into like quality control requirements, technical skills needed, further identifying these gaps, potential scalability. This is where a project may just not go any further. If it's something that's really awesome, but it's just not scalable, if it's not something that would reach large numbers of people or address a major need, it might not be something that a company is going to invest in. And again, that just depends on the company and what the needs are. And so this is where folks could maybe get involved with all sorts of things. I'll let Kristen speak to this as well, where the engagement could come. Next would be, let's say that concept or that idea moves to the next stage, which is clinical trials. This is where you're actually studying if this thing is doing what it should do, right? Like performance data, safety, all the things you would need to be able to submit for clearance to a regulatory body would be done here. And this is where a lot of clinical public health folks may get involved. More to come on that. And then let's say it makes it through clinical trials and gets approved. Then you have your launch. So you're launching something to the market. You're trying to build excitement, awareness, interest, figure out where it's supposed to go, who's going to use it, how it's going to work. All this stuff happens at launch. You know, you're throwing it out into the real world. So a lot that goes on there. And then after that, you've got like these maintenance and then potentially end of life phases. So maintenance is like it's on the market, people are using it. There's a lot of experiences happening with it. We've got feedback. Maybe things could be improved. Maybe there's iterations on the product from there. Maybe there's new branches of the product. You know, there's a new mini pipeline that comes out of that. Or it's, you know, the product's seen its time and there's no longer a need for it. And so it kind of enters this end of life cycle where it finishes up. So I'll pass it to Kristen to talk about where you might have opportunity to interact with industry at those different stages.
Yeah, I think as Andrea alluded to, there's really lots of opportunities at all of these. And depending on, labs, I like to think they come in all flavors. There's no two labs that are the same. We have the opportunity to talk to them on a daily basis, and everyone has different challenges. Everyone has different populations that they're working with. So someone may look like you, but may not. So the opportunities, as Andrea was alluding to, will look different depending on what your laboratory looks like. As far as innovation and discovery, we talked that that's probably primarily happening at research institutions, but some large academic clinical labs do their own research and have opportunities and ideas that they might want to discuss with their or their industry partners. Similar with public health, it all depends on the scope of what you're working on. There might be new organisms, emerging pathogens that you would like a test developed for because you're starting to get a lot of requests for it. That's also something that you can bring to your industry partners. Hey, are you planning on developing this? What would that look like? What's the time frame? You can have those discussions early on. As far as development and proof of concept, I think primarily it would probably be in the clinical lab setting where this would be most beneficial for a review. We're not talking very large scale studies. It's proof of concept. Is this working in the laboratory's hands? Is it getting us the type of data that we're looking for and interested in? Is it reproducible? Are we getting the same results consistently? But scalability for public health and for larger labs. So with a reference lab background, our volume requirements are a lot different than maybe a small community hospital. So that scalability piece would have been very important to evaluate. So opportunities there. Clinical trials, those are also primarily going to be happening in the clinical labs because as industry partners, we're going to want to have that patient data as well. However, I will say that public health labs could be a very strong role in organism. If we're talking about microbiology and specimen management, they might have kind of, I call them the weirdo bugs, the ones that a lot of clinical labs don't see every day that maybe get sent to their state public health labs for identification or susceptibility testing or for further testing. Those would be a good place to maybe get organisms in the form of a repository. So there could be engagement at the clinical trial stage as well. And depending on the assay, of course, after we hit launch, it's both fair game for our clinical and public health lab partners. What did I miss, Andrea? Sound good?
No, it's perfect. I think I'll also add, we tend to, Kristen and I focus a lot on more of like the medical engagements because we're in medical affairs, so that's really our wheelhouse. But I will say, for those that are interested, there's a lot of marketing opportunities, not just like speaking on behalf of a product, but working with marketing units inside of manufacturer industry organizations, thinking about what does the market need, how would people receive products, you know, awareness or even like education that's maybe more about the product itself, very product focused stuff. Um, think about how, as a receiver of this information in the clinical or public health or academic space, how you want to receive information about products. You want it to be transparent and honest and accurate. And so getting insights and input from the clinical community on what those things should look like is really important, right? We want these things to resonate with the community, so, not only from the medical side, but from the commercial side, their stuff needs to resonate with the clinical community as well. That's important. The clinical community, public health communities are the end users of these things. And so that process should be informed by those groups as well. So, there's also post launch, if you are the user of a product and you really like it, you've had experiences you'd like to share with others, there's opportunity to speak to that. There's opportunity to share your workflows or your general experiences with validating something. So, all of these things are very helpful for others who might choose to use this instrument or test. And so, it's always very welcome from our clinical and public health collaborators when they can share experiences and things like that. So just lots and lots of opportunities to engage. I would also say the levels of maybe like clinical, like in the clinical trial space, for example, you may be a part of the lab that's like running the testing and the data and analyzing the data with the company, like that may be you. Or to Kristen's point, you may just be a site that's contributing a biobank or, you know, helping think about maybe the project design because you have so much expertise in this space that this is something that could really benefit from your expertise in that area. So there's just lots of different areas. It's really complex, and lots of opportunity for involvement.
I like that. I like that. I think something that I completely missed too is like specimen management. So, what types of specimens are you interested in for your testing? And what does that look like as it gets to your lab? What conditions do they need to be stored in? How long from time of draw or from acquisition of your specimen? How long does it take to get to your lab? And so, I think having that real world examples communicated to the manufacturers early on or throughout this process is very beneficial too, just to make sure that the validations that your industry partners do meet the needs of the practices of your lab.
So the article has a call to action, and we have talked about like when the article was inspired, there's like a lack of awareness and things like that. So maybe you can talk more about what was the call to action.
Yeah. So this is really pulling together some of the perspectives from all three of our groups on this paper. So clinical, public health, and industry, right? I'd say the overarching theme in the call to action section is around diversity, because I think we all recognize that diversifying the workforce, diversifying collaboration, diversifying how we interact is better for everybody. And I think some of those points were brought up earlier where there's a lot of variability in how people practice and in populations that are served, et cetera. And so by not thinking with a diversity mindset isn't great for us, right? So the first thing is it's kind of from the clinical perspective, thinking about who we engage with from an industry standpoint and not always going to the same people or the same groups. So, really working hard to identify up and coming leaders in the space or laboratories that are doing work in a certain area and trying to leverage a relationship with them, build a relationship with them to do meaningful work. So this is involves both parties, but I think in industry, it's really important that we continue to do this. And I know that a lot of industry companies work hard on this, have entire groups of people, like medical affairs, for example, that are out in the field. And it's their entire job to know who's working in clinical microbiology, what are the trends, who are the people that we need to be talking to, and whose early career that is really, working in this space and is developing their career and has a fresh perspective. Who can we continue to develop relationships with and learn from? And so, same is true for clinical trial sites or post-launch investigational, so like non-registrational investigations, thinking about the balance between making sure we collaborate with sites that have the infrastructure and training to do rigorous, valid research, but also picking sites that have something new and insightful to offer, especially if we're going in new directions with a product line or something. So that's the first one. Second one is trying to really think about including diverse voices in all stages of development. So we kind of talked about that along the pipeline. We might have academic researchers, clinical microbiologists, public health professionals. But to your point, Louise, too, thinking about various levels within a healthcare system, we may very much need insights from medical laboratory professionals working at the bench as well as director level microbiologists. We may need infection prevention perspective, antimicrobial stewardship collaborators. We're seeing a lot of movement into the point of care space. So thinking a lot about how we engage community partners. When you get into community health, it's not just about the clinics that people go to, but it might be kind of peripheral entities that influence health. Maybe those people need to be involved if you're getting really community based with health interventions, things like that. So really trying to diversify.
Reimbursement is a big one too.
Yes, yes, reimbursement, market access. These are all things that we should be incorporating in these projects and thinking about how we diversify the voices at the table. And I always say too, I think about it this way. If you are wondering how you could ever collaborate with industry or it doesn't feel like something you're interested in doing, I just always think about, these products are being made and put onto the market and they serve healthcare needs. Don't we want those to be well informed? Like, don't we want those to be as representative as possible? You need people with this expertise and knowledge, both inside the company and outside of the company, helping guide that mission, making sure we stay in alignment with what's best for patient care. And we can do that best by having diverse voices at the table, but also making sure that we're engaging really collaboratively. So that was the second point. The third is working on, and this gets back to Kristen's point, making tests accessible to those with the greatest need. This does always remain a major challenge. There are multiple things that have to happen for a test to be marketable and scalable and accessible. And some of these things are really hard to achieve. So I think the group as a whole is really recommending that industry partners always try to keep that in mind, that if it's a public health need, we try to develop and have something available for people that need it most. That said, developing tests and getting them to market costs an astronomical amount of money and resources and time. And so there's this very interesting balance of getting things to market, how much it costs to do that, how much it costs to innovate, and then getting things reimbursed, market access issues. So there's a lot of work that goes into trying to make sure there is access for tests in terms of reimbursement, but then also just getting it to communities of need. I'd also note that there are several industry companies. I don't know much about what others are doing. I'll just speak to ours. Our company is very transparent about the fact that a certain percentage of money that comes from sale of the product goes back into the foundation, which then works to build laboratory and health infrastructure in lower middle income countries, also focusing on things like food and water quality. So there's ways that these partnerships can happen that help improve larger public health goals. That may also relate to access and things that may seem a little less direct. So just highlighting an emphasis on that. And then the last point is creating an awareness or knowledge around careers in industry. Maybe breaking down some of the bias. I said in a different podcast, which we were fortunate enough to talk about this piece in, I mentioned, mistrust in industry and in healthcare as a whole in the US didn't come from nowhere. Things happened that broke trust down. And I think all of us are aware of that. We have to be honest about that. But I think where we're at today in diagnostics is that there are really fantastic people, clinical and public health minded people working in these organizations that are aiming to do the most good and striving to innovate for care. And so I think that's why we really wanted to highlight these opportunities to collaborate, because the more of that we have, the better these companies are. So that's the fourth one, is just raising awareness around these roles, not because we want to steal everyone from clinical and public health, because we really need you guys to stay in clinical and public health. But just that, there's opportunities for careers here. There's also opportunities to collaborate if you're not joining industry as a career, and that this is important. So I'm going to pass it to Kristen if I missed anything here.
Oh my gosh, no, I love everything that Andrea said, and well said and summarized. I think overall the awareness of opportunities for everybody involved. Again, just to highlight, we can't function in silos. We can't be innovative if we're all working independently. So this is really to just show, kind of peek behind the curtain of the opportunities that are available with industry and for you. Your different stages in your life. Andrew and I both came from a clinical setting and are working in industry right now. We don't know what the future holds as far as our future careers, but I had no idea what was available until actually I think I stepped in my role as a medical science liaison. So just knowing that there are other opportunities, we need smart, capable people in both sides, in the clinical labs and in industry, to move healthcare along and get it where it needs to be.
Perfect. Um, yeah, no, definitely. And then, and as I mentioned before, seeing as I've been, going out more out there and seeing the level of involvement that people from the industry have, and how closely together, you work with people on the clinical side, and you see all these collaborations. It's very wide opening, and something that I didn't know about. So, can you provide some examples of some roles and responsibilities of the industry professionals?
Well, we do it all. Just kidding. So there are a lot of different opportunities. And I think it's also important to note that the names that we talk about are not necessarily industry standard. There's some terms that you might hear. Medical science liaison is a field branch of medical affairs in most places, but that can look very different from IVD manufacturer to the other. So just these are some just examples. So we've got a branch of our medical affairs team that are really the ones coming out to your institutions, giving disease state presentations, talking about the products more in depth, and are serving as a resource for you from a medical perspective. Additionally, they're the ones that if you have an insight and you want to talk to them, they're great. They'll be visiting your institutions and you can say, hey, let's chat about, this paper that just came out, or let's talk about this guideline or disease state, or, let's go a little bit further in on this product. They're always happy to do that. Andrea, do you want to go back and forth? Do you want to add on or?
Yeah, we can just toss it back and forth. I think to that I would add, let's see, I'll go with the sales colleagues. So everybody's probably most familiar with their sales rep. Honestly, these people are in the lab or like in the field more often than most, and interfacing, with individuals very, very frequently. So I would say, if that's a person that you know and love and talk to very often, and you have a question that is maybe deeply medical, or it's off label, or it's like, I would love to participate in a study. Where do I start? You could always ask that person, and then they hopefully should have a channel to pass you along to the person internally that might be able to do that, whether that's medical affairs or scientific affairs or whoever. So I think that's kind of how I'm making a link back to medical affairs. We're a little, I think we're becoming a lot more visible, but I think we're a little more hidden. We're not always as in front of the customer, although we have lots of people in the field on the medical side that also engage. Um, with folks in the lab. But if you feel like you see your sales rep most often, that is one way, of course, to talk to them about products and anything you want to purchase in contracting. But then if you have other questions that maybe they can't or are unable to answer at the time, they could certainly pass you to someone in medical. That would be one other branch I would mention.
And I think depending on which company you're talking about, scientific affairs can have overlapping roles, or they might serve more of a research based function. So, medical affairs, we do a lot with investigator initiated research, but there are other places where maybe that falls under the scientific affairs branch.
Kristen just brought up a great point there with scientific affairs. That's kind of an interchangeable term. I would say other folks that you would probably collaborate with that can help with an enormous amount of things is your field application specialists. They are some of my favorite people in the company. They're often medical laboratory professionals formerly. They have a ton of knowledge, and they're the ones that can come in and help fix instrument issues, troubleshoot things. You probably see them fairly often as well. So that's another role. That also includes potentially, again, interchangeable terms of like engineers, field service engineers. They are another team that might form or do similar functions or not, depending on which company they're with. We've also got technical support staff. So at least in our organization, we work really closely with our technical support staff, which might be like a hotline or customer service group at amongst various organizations. Um, so these are all people you may interact with or engage with in one way or another, that can open up some doors for collaboration, or that may be people that you just work with really regularly in industry. Also, marketing. We can't forget marketing. Our marketing peers and colleagues are the ones that do a lot of our more product-focused educational efforts, talks about products or presentations around products. You often see them at conferences and things. They will put together these really nice symposia or educational events around a product. They may also do more, like branded content that's specific to a product. Whereas with medical, we're a little more, we don't do anything promotional per se. So we don't do product focused things necessarily. We do more like disease state and can certainly talk about a product in terms of medical value. But if you want to do more product focused activities, like I really love this product and this is how I implement it and this is how I use it and et cetera, that's more of a marketing activity. And so that's another group that you might work with often, depending on what kind of activities you're interested in doing.
And I think something that is really interested to me is government access and market access. So the people that are going to be talking with advocacy groups and policymakers to get some regulations changed to maybe, make changes to healthcare. Market access is going to be focusing on reimbursement. So maybe not at the bench level having these conversations, but maybe your director is noticing that some of your tests aren't getting reimbursed. And so there could be someone at your industry partner that you could talk to see why that is. Are you using the right code to get reimbursed for? Is there something that's being coded weird that maybe needs to be looked at further? So again, government affairs and market access is newer into my repertoire, but they're definitely out there and a resource for you.
Now, I would add one more thing to that too, Chris. I'm so glad you brought that up. We are, the landscape is challenging. I'm going to speak specifically for the U.S. because that's where I reside and that's my perspective. But it's challenging, and so we, I think, are all learning that we have to absolutely integrate our government affairs and market access colleagues into all of our efforts. So study designs too. We want to be thinking about generating evidence that helps support the test all the way around. So support payment or reimbursement for the test, support access to the test, support demonstration that the test improves clinical outcomes, things like that. So really, really important. And we had an interesting event about a year ago where we had some colleagues, talking about from like payer groups and stuff, talking about how you can work together and collaborate to get reimbursement for tests and things. And of course, it's very, very complicated, but they really also emphasized this collaboration. They're like, clinical colleagues that or partners that have an interest in the test and believe in it and see the clinical value in it, can really spearhead efforts in collaboration with industry partners and market access folks to go work with payer groups to say, how do we get there? What's needed to really demonstrate that this needs to be reimbursed or whatever. We would like to improve access for this. And these groups work together to get that done. So again, it's just like another level of collaboration. If you're really interested in going to the Hill and doing some advocacy for something, there's a place for you there as well. So yeah, there's just a lot of opportunities to engage depending on what your interests are.
Well, and for the audience, I will put the link of the article on the show notes so you can just read it, on your own time. And if you have any questions, definitely feel free to reach out. Well, before we wrap the episode, is there anything else that you want to add?
My favorite bug. I have that question all ready to go, Luis. I was ready. Go ahead, ask me.
Well, Kristen, what is your favorite bug?
Mycobacterium tuberculosis all day, every day. It is the coolest bug, been infecting us for millennia. And it was so much fun for me to study for, through my grad school career. And I just think it's so interesting. There's so much we can learn about it and to protect against it and to fight against it. So, Mycobacterium tuberculosis, my favorite bug.
Kristen, I think of you every time I read an article about the interweaving of tuberculosis into arts and media over the historical, just over years of history of arts and media. So there's like every opera we know and love, not every opera, but so many of our operas, the main character is dying of consumption. And then, there's this amazing, shameless plug for, I didn't write it, but this amazing ASM blog article that came out maybe a month ago about, the eras of painters painting women who often had TB and were very pale and very thin, and how this kind of became this like beauty standard or this like dramatic appearance that meant one thing or another because of the impact of TB on our arts. Anyway, I think of you with that. So that's just a little interesting nugget. Luis, do you want mine again? Do I have to change it for every episode, or do I just name the same book? What do I do?
No, if it's the one you really love, and unless it changed from before, but no, but just go ahead and I think was it anginosis?
It was strep anginosus. Yeah. Yeah, I think I still feel the same today. Yeah, I still love her a lot. Are you in the same camp?
It's still pastorella. Yeah, that hasn't changed yet. I still love it, and still, like I was actually I was working on the bench recently, and one came across, and it always makes me smile. I still love it.
You can tell that we're clinical microbiologists and we're like the ones that can, kill people instead of being like, you know what, lactobacillus. Those are really sweet.
Right, right. We're not picking like these nice little probiotic bugs. Yeah, we're
Yeah, no, and that's something I mentioned before, and maybe someone that's tuning in for the first time. I do remember my first Clostridium perfringens, and of course as a nerd, and it got me excited, but that dies away quickly when you realize right what you have and your patient, of course. But it's just microbiologists, you see these things, especially those abnormal ones, and they are exciting as far as the science part of it. Of course, what it represents to the patient, it's another thing, but. Okay, so Mycobacterium and Streptococcus anginosus. Yeah, Angela, what you said definitely with TB. As you were mentioning that, to mind came Moulin Rouge, which I finally watched it after so many years, and I think she had the consumption, as you said, and also the others with Nicole Kidman.
yeah. It's very much in all of our art history, so you should just like dig in a little bit more on that. It's really fascinating. Luis, can I add one more just like social soapbox for this, this paper and beyond? I do this. I know I do this at the end of a lot of episodes, but I just think, Luis, you do such an amazing job bringing people together, right? And we talk about this all the time that if we do anything, we hope it's to encourage people to talk to each other and learn from each other and share knowledge about different things, right? And so I've really done a lot of growth in my time in industry where I was very scared to go into industry. I was nervous about the bias I had before I entered, and I thought I might lose the scientific part of myself. I'm not saying this is accurate. I'm just saying this is what I was experiencing. I was really nervous that I wouldn't feel as altruistic in industry, or that I wouldn't be doing what I felt I was trying to do when I was a clinical microbiologist, right? And I've learned the complete opposite is true, at least in my experience, as I've worked with this, wonderful group of people and doing the work that we're doing every day. But I think the point is that we don't get anywhere by siloing, which Kristen mentioned in the very beginning of this. And if we want to envision a better world of healthcare, we have to learn to work together. And industry provides a platform of innovation, of resources, although not bottomless resources, I will say that, but resources and opportunities, right? Where if we want things to be better, why not fill industry up with knowledgeable, caring, altruistic people who care about the same things our clinical colleagues care about and our public health people care about. And then why don't we all work together to achieve the same goal? I know that sounds a little cheesy, and I'm not trying to be cheesy, but it's where we're at. The landscape in the US is changing rapidly. I have no doubt it will continue to change because things change all the time. Nothing ever stays the same. And so we have to be adaptable. And I think right now we're finding that community collaboration is more important than ever. I think we can go a lot further with collaborating with each other and thinking more as a community with a lot of these projects than we can going maybe a little larger scale right now when we've got a lot of uncertainty and a lot of things are changing. So the connections, the collaborations, the opportunity to like talk to each other and say, what do we want to see for the healthcare of our patients is just like invaluable. So I just always continue to encourage this type of open communication and belief in each other and honesty and transparency. If we could be doing better, we should talk about it. If we could, you know, do new things, we should talk about it. So I love that you're highlighting this paper. We really appreciate it. I want to thank our colleagues on this paper for joining us and, Diana Hernandez and Felipe Sequeira. And then we've also got Kara Levinson from our public health perspective. So we're just really, really grateful for them working on this with us. And I think it's a great example of how we can do something neat together that's informative and start a conversation. So just a lot of thanks.
I love it, and definitely, and for the audience, Felipe, he was in an episode about acid fast bacilli. Had a great chance to talk to him, and a lot of wonderful people out there, and I do try to keep my eye on what publications are out there. But I have like a million jobs, so I cannot follow up on all of them. So I invite you, as you're listening and there's a topic that you want to talk about, or as always, feel free to reach out. Sometimes a lot of this episode ideas, they start with someone emailing me, hey, what do you think about this? And I have this idea, you think, can we do this? And I'm very open to doing a lot of things. So you're more than welcome to on this platform to talk about things. So as I said, I do this one. I saw it through LinkedIn and I read it, but sometimes there's so many out there, and I'm so busy, so I can keep track of them all. So if you can help me out there as you're listening and something that you want to talk about, feel free to contact me. Well, as always, it is so wonderful, talking to you both, and thank you so much for taking the time to be here and Let's Talk Micro.
Thanks so much, Louise. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Luis.
My pleasure. Well, there you have it, and I hope you enjoyed the episode. And I think it's good information, right? Most of us that are medical lab scientists, we might not be aware of what the industry does and of the type of collaborations that are there. So thank you, Kristen and Andrea. As always, such a pleasure talking to you. And before I move on real quick, I just wanted to tell you, if you're attending ASM Micro in Los Angeles this year, I invite you to go to my event, which is Telling Your Story to the Public, Tools to Make Your Science Visible. And this is taking place on Sunday, June 22nd, in room 404, A and B of the Los Angeles Convention Center. So please feel free to ask me any questions if you want to attend. If you're unsure of where to go, you can send me an email and contact me, and I'll tell you. Well, as always, thank you for your support, and you can find Let's Talk Micro on any podcast platform, like Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Pods. So I invite you to subscribe to the podcast, download episodes, and if the app allows you to do so, please go ahead and leave a review. Thank you so much for the support. As far as social media, you can find Let's Talk Micro on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and Blue Sky Social as Let's Talk Micro, on X as Let's Talk Micro 1, on LinkedIn as Luis Plaza. And I have an email address, which is letstalkmicro@outlook.com. So either via social media or via email, you can reach out with any feedback, any suggestions. They are always welcome and appreciated. If you want to support the podcast in any way, you can do so via a Venmo link or via Buy Me a Coffee, KOFI, both links available on the show notes. And hey, are you looking to learn more about antibiotics? Well, if so, please check out www.learnantibiotics.com and the Learn Antibiotics book available on Amazon. These resources include cheat sheets, practice test games, and more, and they are being used by thousands of people worldwide and may be helpful for you or your colleagues. These are some great resources from Dr. Timothy Gauthier, a very passionate pharmacist. And the Let's Talk Micro podcast is supported by the American Society for Microbiology. To learn more about microbes, visit asm.org. And that, my dear audience, is the end of this episode. I hope you enjoy learning about collaborations and the industry. As always, I enjoy sharing this information with you. Thank you for the support. I'm so grateful. And hey, if you're attending Microbe, I invite you to go to my event. But if you see me around, you recognize me, stop, and say hello. I'm looking forward to meeting you and connecting with you. So please, continue bringing that passion to what you do. It's so important. You do such great work. So, as always, stay motivated, stay safe, and of course, continue talking micro. Until the next time. Bye.